You walk past the alcohol aisle at a store without a second thought. Bottles lined up by the hundreds. Beer, wine, spirits, all waiting to be picked off a shelf. You don't think about where any of it came from. You don't think about the first time a human being ever tasted something like it. But somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, before farming, before writing, before cities, someone put their mouth to a wound in a tree and felt the world tilt sideways for the first time. Nobody planned it. Nobody understood it. It just happened. This is the story of how alcohol found humans, long before humans learned to make it on purpose.
Start with the tree itself. In parts of Africa and Southeast Asia, certain palm species store enormous amounts of sap inside their trunks. Cut into the bark, and the tree bleeds a sugary liquid. Early humans didn't need advanced tools to discover this. A broken branch, an animal gouging at the bark, a natural crack from wind or heat. Any of these could open a small wound in a palm trunk, and once opened, the sap would flow. Now picture what happens next. Sap is sugar water, essentially. Left exposed to open air in a warm, humid climate, it doesn't stay sterile for long. Wild yeast is everywhere. It floats invisibly through tropical air, settles on fruit, bark, skin, leaves. The moment that sugary sap meets wild airborne yeast, fermentation begins on its own. No human decision required, no brewing knowledge needed, just sugar, yeast, warmth, and time.
Within a day or two, that sap starts to change. Sugars convert into alcohol, bubbles form. The liquid turns tangy, slightly fizzy, faintly intoxicating. This naturally fermented palm sap is sometimes called palm wine today, and versions of it are still made across Africa and Asia. But the very first version wasn't made by anyone. It brewed itself, quietly, inside a wounded tree, waiting. Here's where it gets interesting. Who found it first? The honest answer is that we don't know exactly who or when, but we know the pattern almost certainly repeated across different regions and different eras. Anthropologist Robert Dudley has spent years studying this question, and he proposes something called the Drunken Monkey Hypothesis. Dudley's research suggests that primates, including the ancestors of humans, evolved a strong attraction to the smell of ethanol because it signaled ripe, sugar-rich, calorie-dense fruit. Ethanol was a chemical trail leading straight to food. Long before humans existed, our primate ancestors were already sniffing out fermenting fruit and eating it, alcohol and all. So by the time actual humans were wandering through forests near these bleeding palm trunks, the attraction to that smell was already wired into the brain. A curious human, or maybe a thirsty one, would have smelled that sharp, sweet, slightly sour scent drifting from a damaged tree. Something in the ancient primate brain would have said, follow that smell. It means food. It means sugar. It means survival.
And so, someone drank it. What happened after that first sip is where things shift from biology into behavior. Ethanol is a psychoactive compound. It crosses into the bloodstream fast, reaches the brain within minutes, and alters mood, coordination, and inhibition almost immediately. For a person who had never experienced anything like it, this would have been overwhelming. A strange warmth, a loosening of tension. Maybe laughter that came easier than usual. Maybe clumsiness that felt, strangely, kind of fun. Biochemist Patrick McGovern, who has spent decades analyzing ancient pottery residue for traces of fermented beverages, has argued that the human relationship with alcohol goes back much further than agriculture. McGovern's research on residues found in ancient vessels suggests that people were consuming fermented drinks long before anyone was intentionally cultivating grain for that exact purpose. In other words, humans didn't invent fermentation. They discovered it already happening in nature, and then, over time,
learned to encourage it, repeat it, and eventually control it.
Think about what that means. The very first alcoholic drink a human ever consumed wasn't a product. It wasn't a recipe. It was an accident of biology, meeting chemistry, inside a tree. A palm gets wounded, sap leaks, wild yeast lands, sugar becomes alcohol. A curious primate brain, already primed by millions of years of evolution to chase that smell, follows it straight to the source. There's a reason this story keeps showing up in different forms in different parts of the world, using different plants. Fermented palm sap in Africa, fermented honey becoming mead in parts of Europe and Asia, fermented fruit found in the stomachs of animals that had simply eaten rotting fruit off the ground. Every one of these is the same basic accident: sugar, yeast, time, warmth. The ingredients for alcohol are not rare. They are almost everywhere in nature, waiting for the right conditions.
This raises an uncomfortable question. If alcohol wasn't invented by humans, but discovered again and again independently all over the world, what does that say about how deeply this substance is wired into biology itself? Psychologist Steven Pinker has written about human behaviors that seem too consistent across cultures to be coincidence, arguing that widespread patterns often point to something built into shared evolutionary history rather than shared invention. The near-universal human relationship with alcohol fits that pattern. It shows up almost everywhere humans settled, often before written history even begins. Once humans noticed that fermented palm sap made them feel different, the behavior didn't stop at accidental discovery. People began deliberately cutting into palm trunks. They collected the sap in containers. They let it sit longer, experimented with timing, learned which trees produced the best results. This is the exact moment where accident turns into tradition. A random natural process becomes a repeated human behavior, refined generation after generation, long before anyone understood what yeast actually was or how fermentation chemically worked.
It's worth pausing here to decode something. Fermentation, in plain terms, is simply a chemical process where microorganisms like yeast break down sugar and release alcohol and carbon dioxide as byproducts. That's genuinely all it is. No mysticism, no complicated machinery required. Early humans didn't need a microscope to use it. They only needed to notice that something delicious and strange happened when sap or fruit sat around long enough in warm air. Now, zoom out. Why does this matter to you, sitting here, generations removed from that first discovery? Because the instinct that pulled that early human toward the smell of fermenting palm sap never fully disappeared. The same reward circuitry in your brain, shaped over millions of years to associate the scent and taste of alcohol with abundant, sugar-rich food, is still active today. When you smell wine or beer or the sweetness of a cocktail, some ancient part of your neurology is still responding the way a hungry primate's brain once did in a forest, chasing calories, chasing survival. Your relationship with alcohol today, whether you drink often, rarely, or not at all, is shaped by a chain of accidents that stretches back long before agriculture, long before civilization, long before anyone could have called it a choice. It started with a wounded tree that nobody meant to wound, sap that nobody meant to expose, yeast that nobody invited, and a curious mouth that couldn't resist the smell. You walk past the alcohol aisle at a store without a second thought, but now you know what's actually sitting on those shelves. Not an invention, an accident, repeated on purpose for tens of thousands of years.